stupid. She's gotten her boobies.
Oh, I'd better go get my magnifying glass.
Oh, and they are so perky. Can't believe my grandmother actually felt me up.
Hey guys, it's Will. With Terrible Infant this time around, usually Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society, but I'm here with an 80s themed video. So we'll throw this bad boy up, hopefully on 80s Nerdgasm Instagram, if Mike feels so inclined. If you're on YouTube, hey, give us a sub. That would be awesome. We've been slowly rising in our number of subs, and that's awesome because every new sub helps us quite a bit. And helps direct the content that we're making too, because if people sub when they watch a video, we know, hey, they like that video, we should make more videos like that. So if you are subbed, thank you so much for subbing. If you've shared our stuff, huge thank you, because that always really helps people who share our stuff. We're also on Patreon. If you feel so inclined, the money from the Patreon currently goes into 80s Nerdgasm, Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society, Sticky Floor Cinema, Instagram, and the YouTube channels of all of those, and then also goes into our Facebook page, and it goes all these different places. So it's a huge help to all of these things that we're doing. So what am I talking about today? 16 Candles, hell to the yes. I'm going to be doing a Blu-ray review of the Arrow video release of the classic John Hughes 1984 film 16 Candles. So this is a 4K, yeah. So it's 4K remaster scan of the original negative, and so it looks absolutely incredible. Like, it really looks incredible. And I'm sorry, my dog is coming over to say hi. Are you gonna lie down? She's lying down. You good? Yeah? Okay, cool. So, so it looks incredible, and the audio is fantastic. And one of the things that I actually think is really cool about this release is that they have the original theatrical audio on here, but then also there's the, so when this film was played on, this film played on TV a lot, and actually the first time I saw it was on TV. Let me pop this out of the case here, because I actually really love this. This is reversible. So you can, the cover that's on the slipcase, you can put on, it comes with that as the cover, but you can reverse it if you'd rather have the, kind of like the old poster there. So I did that. So there you go. So I got the poster showing there. Sorry, I had to deal with the dog. She was partying all up in my space, and I couldn't deal with it. If you were following the drama with the dog, she came over here. She was making a bunch of noise. She was sitting down at my feet, and then she started farting everywhere. So I had to stop, and she's in the bedroom now. So anyway, cool. I was talking about 16 Candles, and I believe the reversible cover art I was showing off to you. I was talking about the audio track. So one of the bonus features on here is that you can watch it with, so like I said, this was shown on TV a lot, and when it was shown on TV there was a licensing issue, and they couldn't get all the songs that were in the theatrical release licensed for television, so a lot of the songs are totally different. And so I'm actually more familiar with the television audio because I saw it on TV a bunch of times, but I have seen the other version of it as well. So it's not like completely alien to me, but I am more familiar with the other one. So if I'm going for like a nostalgia trip, I'll probably watch the TV one, but otherwise I'll probably just do it as it was intended to be seen by John Hughes. So like I said, looks incredible and a great presentation. And then just to give you an idea of what's in here, there's 2 essays in here, and one of them is really great, and it is called Bittersweet 16, John Hughes, 16 Candles, and the Uncomfortable Truths of Adolescence. So to tell you about that essay, it's really interesting because it does 2 things. The first thing it does is it gives you basically a history of teenagers in the United States. Like, the phrase teenager didn't exist until the 1940s. And the first teen movies came out in the 50s that were really focused and marketed at teens, and they were what is the one about that was the first movie to ever have a rock and roll song in it? I studied this in film school, or like in like film studies class at some point. Blackboard Jungle, that's what it's called, which is a film I'd seen before. And then the same year, I think Rebel Without a Cause came out, and James Dean became like this big teen icon, right? And then you had like a lot of movies in the 70s that spoke to the counterculture, right? They were not necessarily about teenagers, but I think that teenagers, like movies like Easy Rider and stuff, that I think Bonnie and Clyde, the Warren Beatty, those are both 60s movies, but those movies into the 70s, I think there was a lot of stuff that maybe teenagers could relate to. But again, one of the interesting things that this essay points out is that the filmmakers in the 70s were really making adult movies. They weren't making movies about teenagers. They just maybe made movies that appealed to teenagers. But in the 80s, there came this... Well, I guess in the late 70s, you had Carrie and you had Halloween. And then coming into the 80s, you had Fast Times at Ridgemont High, you had Valley Girl, and then you had John Hughes. And so it really contextualizes this film within the continuum of teenage culture in the United States, which is really, really cool. The other thing it does, and I should say, if I didn't say, and I apologize for this, my brain's a little fried right now, it's kind of late, Nikki Bahan is who wrote that essay. And then she also talks about the racial and kind of sexual identity politics of the film. And there's also a bonus feature on here. Since I'm talking about this, I might as well talk about it, because this is something that I think really needs to be talked about if you're discussing this film in 2020, as I am, because this movie has become kind of like a lightning rod for discussions of like toxic masculinity, rape culture, sexual and gender politics and identity in the 1980s. In the Me Too era, basically. Molly Ringwald has talked about it in essays and interviews that she's done. And there was when Kavanaugh was up to be a Supreme Court justice, and he was doing those congressional hearings because of those women who were testifying that he sexually assaulted them when he was younger. There was an essay that came out that got a lot of attention, that analyzed this film from the perspective of the Me Too era and talked about how it was perfectly emblematic of the kind of the attitudes about gender and sexuality that people like Brett Kavanaugh exhibit. And so there's another bonus feature on here called, it's actually just easier to, the contrast of the black and white ink is easier to read than the ink here, so I'm just going to read it off the back of the slipcase. But the bonus feature is called A Very 80s Fairy Tale, an all-new video essay written and narrated by Soraya Roberts, looking at the film from a contemporary feminist perspective. And so the essay in the booklet, that bonus feature, and other things that you can read online, including this essay I'm talking about with regards to Brett Kavanaugh, are looking at certain aspects of the film. The Anthony Michael Hall character, the way that he behaves towards the Molly Ringwald character, the contrasts that are drawn between the Molly Ringwald character and the Haviland Morris character, she plays the girlfriend of Jake Ryan. Obviously the part where Jake Ryan talks about how, oh, my girlfriend's so drunk I could violate her 10 different ways and she wouldn't even know, right? And then how he gives her to Anthony Michael Hall to drive around, and what happens with the two of them, where the two of them end up having sex, but they both don't remember what happened, so they're both really drunk, so there's this kind of ambiguity about, was he also passed out? It wasn't he? Is it a date rape? What actually happened there? And so I'm not the kind of person that, being like a white, cisgender male, to use the common the parlance of the day, I'm not the kind of person that people want to hear talk about these things, right? So I won't go into it in great detail, but suffice it to say that these are, I agree with, I would say 99% of everything that I read and hear in these bonus features and in these essays about, honestly, if I were to disagree with any of the things that I've read about this, it has nothing to do with the points that they're making about gender and sexuality and in the whole kind of the rape culture and all that. It would be their interpretation of the filmmaking, which I don't think is particularly relevant to, because people who are cultural critics don't know that much about the culture they're criticizing, in as much as they don't study films, they don't study novels, they learn how to critique things from a particular either political or philosophical perspective, right? So oftentimes when they analyze novels, when they analyze music, when they analyze art, when they analyze film, what they're saying about the film is not right. And you know that if you've studied film, or if you've made films, if you've written films, if you've analyzed films from the process of the creator, you know that their interpretation of the filmmaker in this scene seems to be saying, they don't, those bits of it are wrong. But that has nothing to do with the analysis of gender politics and sexuality and all those things, right? So there's no point in me even speaking about this because it's been spoken about a lot, but I don't think that you can talk about this movie in 2020 without that coming up. And that is like a pronounced element to the bonus features here, and that's why I'm discussing it now. You also get into the racial politics of the Getty Watanabe character, Long Duck Dong. And I mean, honestly, the first time I saw this movie, that was something where I was like, it's just off because it doesn't fit in with the movie. But what I will say about it is that, you know, in the bonus features, Getty Watanabe talks about the fact that he didn't perceive the character to be, you know, obviously like making fun of rather than laughing along with the character. He didn't get that impression from John Hughes. When he was auditioning for the part, it didn't feel like that's what the part was, and he didn't really get that it may be going there until, and he talks about this very specifically in the bonus features, until they filmed the dinner scene where he's talking about hyena versus hernia and like all that stuff. And then the way that John Hughes was shooting the reactions of the other characters around him, he started to think that maybe like, oh, you know, maybe this character's being made fun of rather than being in on the joke in scenes in this movie. He also says that, you know, there's every time you see his, so his character is a Chinese exchange student. And every time you see him, and in some cases every time someone mentions him, there's a sound of a gong, right? Which is like obviously kind of blatantly racist and not like haha funny, it's just kind of stupid. But he said that he had no idea they were going to do that. John Hughes never mentioned that. He never saw that when he was like being shown footage of the film before it was finalized and stuff like that. And so that element of really, really leaning into the haha funny, you know, he's, you know, an Asian character that we can make fun of. He did not, Getty Watanabe, the actor, did not see until the film was finished. And so it's also worth mentioning that Getty Watanabe is Japanese American, because I have read essays that say American actor Getty Watanabe is playing an Asian character. And it's like, well, he's Japanese American. So, like, people try to make it seem really, really blatantly racist because like they cast an American as a Chinese exchange student. It's like, well, but he is Japanese American, so he's not Chinese, and I get that. And you can, you know, people can write and kind of analyze how they feel about that. I mean, there's a very, very long history of Hollywood casting, you know, Koreans as Chinese and Chinese as Koreans and Japanese as Koreans and Japanese as Chinese and all that, right? But he is Asian American. He's not just like a white guy that they cast and put makeup on. So I think there are some people who gloss over the facts to try to make it seem more heinous than it is. But again, I'm not here to talk about that. I love this movie, and you know, again, like there are people who say, "Oh, we should blacklist movies like this," right? I mean, I think that John Hughes did a very good job of being very honest about teenage experience and depicting culture as it was in the 1980s. And if you don't have movies that honestly depict culture as they are when they come out, then you can't look back at that culture and understand what it was. And maybe why people who grew up in that culture are the way that they are, right? And like, to banish something because it no longer fits contemporary kind of politics and philosophy, I think is to, and again, I want to make it very clear, I'm not talking about things like pulling down Confederate monuments. I'm not talking about banning, you know, Nazism, anything. I'm talking very specifically about films, right? Like Birth of a Nation, right? Are we going to blacklist that movie because it's so heinously, brutally racist that it's disgusting, right? But extremely important in the history of cinema, right? And so we can look at it as both things. And in looking at it that way, we can understand, I think, about the mindset of people in the past, how things were then and how they came to be the way they are now. Now, obviously, 16 Candles does not belong in the same category as like one of the most heinously racist, pro-Klan, pro-Confederate, you know, pieces of propaganda ever made. But it has become involved in that kind of cultural cycle. And so it bears mentioning with regards to that. So, but again, I do really love this movie, and you know, a lot of people, you know, Diablo Cody is interviewed in the bonus features here, who's like a very pronounced feminist, and she loves this movie too. And so I think it really just depends on where you're coming from, when you saw this movie, how you saw it, and how you related to it. So to me, this movie has like the perfect amount of bonus features. It's just over 2 hours worth of stuff, and I'm just going to go over really quickly what's on here, give you my basic impressions of it after that very long-winded chat that I was hoping would be like 2 minutes, but it lasted like 10 minutes, and then I'll get out of your hair. There's an interview with Jackie Birch, who is the casting director, and that's really super cool because she talks about how all the actors came onto the film, how she met them, like what their ages were at the time of filming, and there's a feature on here when Getty met Deborah, which is Getty Watanabe and Deborah Pollack, who plays his girlfriend in the movie, and it talks like the two of them are still friends, 36 years later, and it's them in conversation now. And they have so much chemistry even now, like recollecting how they met and what the movie was like. And they talk about like deleted scenes that they filmed that never ended up in the movie, and like how they first became friends with each other, how they became friends with the other members of the cast and crew. Like they talk about how there were 3 age groups in the film, like the teenagers, who were really basically Anthony Michael Hall and Molly Ringwald, and then the people in their 20s who were like the guy who plays Jake Ryan and like Haviland Morris and the two of them and stuff like that. And then you had the older, like the parents and the grandparents and stuff. And actually, there's a bit with one of the other actors, the guy who plays the guy who's marrying Molly Ringwald's character's sister in the film, Sam's sister. That is called Rudy the Bohunk. John Kapelos is the actor who played that. His interview is really interesting. He was in Second City with like Malkovich and people like that. So he talks about being like a theater actor and kind of moving into film and growing up in Canada and then coming to the U.S. And he and John Hughes had a lot of the same like cultural touchstones. Were very much like the same age and stuff like that. And so he really got along with John Hughes, and they had like a really great kind of like intuitive connection there. But he talks about how like one of the grandfathers in the film, for instance, was in a movie with Marilyn Monroe. And they would just like sit around and like shoot the shit with these actors, and they would tell them these crazy stories about like old Hollywood. And like, because these people were like, they were in their 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s in the 80s. So they were born like 1910 or whatever, right? So they were like in golden era 1940s Hollywood. Like that's just amazing, especially for actors of that age, up and coming actors. Like I bet it was incredible to be on the set and hear those stories and stuff. And everyone talks about how John Hughes is like the nicest guy and was really accommodating with everyone, and would very often try to find commonalities between the actors and encourage them to be friends with each other, and would like sit with the extras at lunch and like just like chat with them. And there was Adam Rifkin, actually, I think he directed Detroit Rock City. He was in this movie as an extra, and he asked John Hughes, he was a teenager at the time, he asked John Hughes after he was done filming all his scenes, he said to John Hughes, "Hey, can I shadow you like on the set of this film? Like I really want to be a filmmaker and like whatever." And John Hughes, like without even thinking about it, was like, "Yeah, like obviously come back whenever you want, and like I would love to have you here, and ask me any questions that you need to ask me, follow me around and all that stuff." And so everyone just seems to have had a tremendous experience on this. So let me just read you what else is on here. You have The In-Between, a newly filmed interview with camera operator Gary Kibbe, which is really cool too, because you get like the technical perspective on it and like what a camera operator is doing day to day on the set, and like his recollections of being on the movie. The New Wave of Nerd, that's the Adam Rifkin interview. Music for Geeks, which is an interview with composer Ira Newborn. So he talks about how he composed the music and how he worked with John Hughes and like what his approach to the film was and stuff like that. A very 80s fairy tale, that's one I already told you about, the analyzing film from a contemporary feminist perspective, celebrating 16 Candles. So this is from, I think, 2007 or 2008 or maybe 2009. And it's like 20 or 30 minutes long, and it's got like Diablo Cody is in that one, Anthony Michael Hall, Haviland Morris, Getty Watanabe. So they're all like stars of the film cast and crew, other filmmakers and film critics who were influenced by the movie, and it's just like a kind of like an appreciation of it, like when they first saw it, why they loved it, what about it they loved, things like that. But it's pretty in depth. I mean, that's one of the longer features that's on here. And that's basically it. So those are all the mini documentaries on there, and I just learned a lot about this movie. And this is I think this movie has very much like a romantic, fun attitude of like, it's very much a movie that's about and part of pop culture. Like, like MTV started in 1981. This movie came out in 1984. Like, it was so perfectly timed, and like there were all these sex comedies for men at the time, like these Animal House type movies, and then here comes this movie with a central female character that's very honest about, like, you know, despite whatever problems you might have with the gender politics in this film, it is very honest about the experiences of teenage girls, and it allows them to be strong, independent characters. They swear, they have their own sense of fashion, they have their own attitude, they have their own sense of, like, what, you know what I mean? Like, they're very three-dimensional female characters, like, and especially the Molly Ringwald as the protagonist. You have a female-centered teen movie in which she is a very strong character. And you know, there's a lot of conservative, like, and again, like, you know, like, you can look at the conservative kind of family politics, if you want to call it that, in this movie, of like, just find someone to love, and you just want a family, and like everyone just wants to settle down and have a job, and like there's this kind of interesting, you know, dichotomy of like, you're rooting for the misfits, and this is a movie for the misfits, but what the misfits really want is to be the insiders, right? They want to be the cool kids, and it's this kind of like very 80s thing of like, even the outsiders are aspiring to be like the Wall Street tycoons, right? Like, everyone wants the money, they want, you know, they want the house, they want the yard, they want the life, and that's kind of what this movie's about. So it's like a movie for misfits, but it's about how you should, it's this kind of conservative thing of like, you should aspire to be normal, rather than leaning into the misfit thing, right? And aspiring to be unique, I guess, basically. I'm rambling now. So check this release out. It's really fantastic. It's the Arrow video release of 16 Candles. My name is Will. You've been watching either 80s Nerdgasm or Terrible Infant, depending on where you're watching this. We will see you next time.